This program was made possible by the generous support of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, Dakota Integrated Systems, Andra Rush, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation Advised Fund at Grand Rapids Community Foundation, the Grand Traverse Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, the Grand Traverse Resort and Casinos, and the Nottawasepi Huron Band of the Potawatomi, as well as the following funders.
When the people came from Europe, there were 100 million Native Americans, and today there's a handful. I mean, it was an American Holocaust.
Our people make up less than 2% of the total United States population. It's very easy to become invisible in this country.
There's such a sadness that can't be overcome, and you can't just look in the mirror and say, oh, be happy today, when some of these memories are way back in your history. And to get other people to realize that, it's hard.
If you review history, perhaps the Indians are pretty justified in a lot of the anger. However, you can't let anger destroy you, and I think that's the strong message. Take that anger and turn it into something good that can work on behalf of future generations.
We have ancestors who shed blood and who lost family, who lost homes, land, and loved ones. And I want to make sure that our youth grows up with that reverence and with that respect.
I need to honor, the struggles that our ancestors faced by helping the younger generations.
Our youth are really suffering. They're not as strong as they used to be. To me, I think it's important to get them to be active, to have respect for our cultural ways, and that helps to give them respect for themselves.
When you aren't grounded in that spirituality, in that self, then that you try to fill that hole some way. And drugs and alcohol are an easy way to do that.
Part of surviving as a nation is, knowing your language and your culture. Without that, you're non-existent.
We are working hard to save our language here. And when I say save it, it was lost during the boarding school era.
What people do come away with, in that little chapter in their history books or social study books is how we used to be in the past.
While we're still here, we'll always be here. And I've had people come out here and look around for teepees. They said, don't you guys live in teepees? I said, no, we live just like you guys do.
Grew up having a real split childhood in that in the summer times we would go up to the Lac du Flambeau Indian Reservation and see my mother's half of the family, and then we'd come back to River Forest, which is as nice a community as there was in suburban Chicago. Being able to go back and forth and be able to move through the different cultures is something that is really ingrained in me. It was the perfect thing for a little boy. We'd run the reservation. It's also very, very tough. We had an uncle that was one of my favorite guys, and you couldn't be with a better guy to go fishing or to just be out in the woods with until about noon, and then he'd start drinking. I didn't want to be around him at all, or it was going to be physically abusive. When I was a little boy, and I'm saying maybe 3 or 4, they would give me a little basket and say, go pick strawberries. And I would walk down this sandy road to where the road turned, and you could go in there and there were strawberries and raspberries. And my mother would say, if the bear is there, just show him your fishing license so he knows you're not a hunter. And sure enough, the bear would be like right there. And then I'd come back and they'd say, oh, did you see the bear? And I'd say, Muckwa, the bear. And I'd say, yes, of course, we saw him, everything's fine. And then one day my mother decided she would go and pick berries with us, and sure enough the bear was there, and she took off running, and I was like, why would you run? It's just the bear, we're fishermen. But I remember that story. I remember the story in Ojibwa. The lullabies I know are, are Native American. Nigani Ogimakwe. Nigani, original, from the first fire, from the first spark of the first fire of creation. That's how original. Ogema, chief. Kwe, woman. Nigani Ogimakwe. That was one of the songs. I'm a little too upset here. There's such a feeling of loss about people and about a way of life and about things that are true that are really, suppressed. I'm sitting here with all these pictures that were just torn to shreds by my mother, and they're all great pictures, all things that would be wonderful to use in the documentary, but she just got so drunk and so angry that she just started shredding them. And I could remember going back as a child, stopping her when she was drunk from ripping up any more of these. And to this day, I'm still trying to find and match them up and tape them together so that they can be a whole picture. And that ripping in half is really what we're talking about. Half of it is in the white world and half of it is in the Native American world. And how do you reconcile that?
As somebody who grew up in an urban setting, I've had to learn who I am as an Indian person as I've been integrated into, the total population, so to speak. And I think that's important. When I was in Chicago a couple weeks ago, I was listening to testimony after testimony, people talking about how they went home to the reservation in the summertime to be with their grandparents so they could learn what it was to be Indian. My grandparents didn't live on the reservation, so I spent a lot of time there when I was young and listening to my grandfather talk, listening to my grandmother talk, and how they conducted themselves as Indian people. It was never sat us down and had a lesson and said, hey, I'm going to tell you how to be an Indian today. However, as I reflect back, I can see how they were really teaching us to be Indian. And that people will say, yeah, I was brought up to deny I was Indian, never mention I was Indian. And I listen to those stories and I think, boy, how tragic that was.
I just grew up knowing that I was different because I had this, very dark, full-blooded dad and a very light-skinned mother. And at that time, I think people looked down upon my mom for having a Native husband. It was hard when my dad left because I felt like that part of my identity was gone. And I had my mom who didn't really understand how to teach me about being Native. I used to struggle with that identity because my non-Native family kind of like not understanding me and almost like putting me down, but I know they really didn't mean to. They used to call me squaw and, I didn't really understand what that meant. When I found out that that was really derogatory, that made me feel really bad. And so my teenage self-image was horrible. And so I often looked for my peers who were Native and they helped me out a lot. I really felt strongly drawn to the Native side, more so just because I felt like that was more of who I was. And I felt like the outside world looked at me as being Native. My father was very connected with his culture and his heritage. It just emanated from him all the time. Whenever he had an opportunity to teach me something that was spiritual, or there was a connection between being Native and just daily life, he would tell me about it. That was really hard. That was very hard to have to see my father leave and leave me. Kind of felt deserted in a way, and that's the point where I kept going out to the reservation and hanging out with my family and my cousins just to keep that part of me, alive.
this wasn't an area that was a priority for Isabella County at the time. And I remember the roads were never taken care of. There was a tree in the middle of the road. You drove around the tree. A couple of short blocks into town, things were completely different, light years different in technology and services and roads and, you know, what they had available to them.
In that time, it was very hard for Native people to get work, and I know a lot were, you know, very dependent upon government staples of food brought to the reservation to help us.
That was our good time of the month. You got that at the first of the month. They give you flour and meat and beans. So that's when you could really eat good for a couple of weeks, and you kind of get slim again.
Coming out to the reservation and walking through and reconnecting with my friends and finding out, you know, how many days they may have went without ever tasting meat, or, you know, the fact that it's 20 degrees out, we're playing in the snow, and there's no skirting or protection, and the wind's blowing right underneath their cabin floors or right underneath their trailers. First outhouse I ever saw was here on the Isabella Reservation.
We started from a small car bingo to a couple of multi-million-dollar casinos.
When we opened our big casino in '96, there's only like 3 other casinos then. We had like 97% of the market.
In the proximity to larger cities, the metropolitan cities here in Michigan, allowed it to be a very prosperous casino.
You know, we're the largest employer in Isabella County. You know, we can stand shoulder to shoulder with some of the largest Fortune 500 companies.
And our tribal council decided that they would do a per capita distribution plan. And through that, we would get a percentage of our profits.
The old misconception was we were all drunks or we didn't pay taxes. Well, the new misconception in modern times is that all Indians are wealthy as a result of per capita payments.
You talk about myth versus fact. I mean, you know, gaming tribes. The last study done was that only about 10% were even profitable.
They think we're just all like high and mighty, we're all rich, you know, but we're not.
I have heard many of the young kids tell me, I'll make more money than, you know, than you ever will, and I don't have to do anything. So why do I need to go to school? But I think that that is changing.
They're looking at these things in a more responsible way, and, you know, that's a big change for our tribe to all of a sudden have all these gaming revenues and to come from like such a poor state that it takes a lot of practicing and learning how to deal with it.
But tribes are continuing to seek diversity and seek alternative economic developments. And the Saginaw Chippewa tribe is no different. You know, we realize that gaming is a saturated market. But we also realize that we've had a wonderful gift, a financial gift from that, where we have the resources to look at alternatives.
If you go back past my mother, back to her mother, who was Danish, and her father, who was a Ho-Chunk Winnebago, he had been, and his father, before that, had gone through the Carlisle Indian School. And what happened was, sort of when all the trouble with the Indians subsided in the late 1800s, they went out and collected tons of Indian children from the Great Plains, from all the tribes, and brought them to Carlisle, and they were going to, as they said, quote, educate the Indian out of them. A couple of things that were really important and were ingrained in me was that you could always be picked up by the federal government, by the Army, and removed from the house. But we always had a plan. We always knew where we would go. If we were removed, how we'd get away, and we were taught at an early age how to take public transit and you know, how to operate. So the way I grew up was to not proclaim being a Native American.
Well, and this community has a boarding school here that is a huge elephant in the room that people don't talk about.
What was the purpose of the boarding schools? Basically, it was the United States trying to deal with the Indian problem. So let's educate, culturate them through education. Kill the Indian, save the man. And how do you kill the Indian? You kill his spirit. Take away the language, take away the ceremonies, take away their traditions. Teach them how to learn skills that will help them to succeed in America and become acculturated.
Yeah, you have generations of families that have lost loved ones. 2 miles from here.
There was a lot of Native children that were undocumented that disappeared. And the city only acknowledged through records maybe less than 10. But through our research now, they've been able to identify over 150.
We were put in a form of, one could argue, a concentration camp.
Levi, do you remember the mark that grandmother had on her arm?
She had a little tattoo?
Yep. And we said, what is that, grandmother? And she would become very quiet and look off into space. And then in a few minutes she would say, well, that is where they tattooed me when I went to boarding school. That's my number.
It really comes right down to forms of violence against people's souls. And we're really talking about souls of children that are so impressionable.
And my grandparents, great-grandparents came out of that with extremely low dignity, honor, integrity, the inability to be a parent and know how to be a parent, quite possibly with a perverted sense of sexuality because of abuse.
A lot of experts will say some of the social problems, as far as alcoholism, sexual abuse, etc., really comes right back from that, the horrible things that happened to Indian kids when they were in boarding schools.
We have gotten back our boarding school here in Mount Pleasant, Indian Industrial Boarding School, and we had a healing ceremony that acknowledged the 75th year of the closing of it, which was big for Indian people. And in preparation of that, because I was on tribal council, we got lists of all the students that went there. And I looked on the list and my grandmother had attended that. And I remember saying to my fellow council members, like, well, I don't know why my mother never told me that. So I was kind of like really puzzled. So I remember my mother lives with me, going home, and Mom, how come you never told me that Grandma went to the boarding school? And she just turned around and looked at me with complete disbelief, and she said, what? She said, I never knew my mother went to the boarding school. And I was like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. And it really put a lot of personal trauma that I just thought was my family story into perspective.
The survivors of the boarding school, one of the most predominant things they ever said was, I didn't know and didn't learn how to love. So what's happened is that we've repeated this pattern, this cycle, and it's affected our parenting, our relationships, our families. The one gift that I give my boys is to tell them I love you, and we give hugs. And I think because I know what it was like growing up not having that, and I was not going to let that cycle repeat itself.
Then if you're dealing with our families in the school system, I'm wondering, why are they struggling in school? Well, education systems were used to rip us of our children and our identity. We're trying to rebuild that trust. And how do you teach your communities that a lot of the issues here wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all that trauma that was done to the collective whole? And that this isn't your identity.
There are things that we are talking about today that we could not talk about 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Now people are waking up, but we still have a long ways to go.
We need to heal. We know that. And we can't heal unless others acknowledge all that happened.
But I think that there are things that Mount Pleasant community can do. an annual homage of some sort to pay respect to some of the things that have happened, to say, you know what, you're right. Some atrocious things happened in our community.
One of the blessings from getting back our Indian boarding school is the fact that we can use it as a tool today to help educate not just the non-Native community, it's our tribal members and what that stood for, how people were treated. I think it's important that we acknowledge that that existed, but what I would like to see is not to have blame put anymore, because I don't think you can heal if you're blaming others.
I struggled a lot due to alcohol and drugs. I come from an alcoholic family. It was very difficult growing up. It was almost seemed to me like it was traditional to be a person who drinks a lot regularly.
Alcohol is just a tool in my community to medicate and hide away from other things.
Get through the pain.
Yep.
Now, if there's kids that are having struggles, especially with alcohol and drug abuse, we are very fortunate that we have all of these places to go and get help. We have so many programs that they're all dedicated to helping our youth.
You know, and I'm so grateful that I have a tribe that recognizes that need. But the biggest hurdle, I think, for anybody is to individually recognize that need and to want that recovery.
One of the coined terms in Indian country is wellbriety. That's just not about how you live in terms of recovering from addictions or sobriety, but it's about how you live your way of life, how you carry yourself, you know, within that circle. Now I can count so many different handfuls of Native men in our community that they're not drinking, they're not doing drugs, you know, they're not doing these things that are harmful to families, and so especially our young Native boys, and they see that and now they want to be like him.
The huge proportion of the disparities in Indian country are owned by the Indian men, in some cases 300% to 500% greater than Indian women. And yet there's no programs for Indian men by and large. We have programs for maternal and child health, we have women's health programs, but the group that's suffering the most, who have the greatest pain psychologically and in terms of physical pain and in death rates and anything you look at practically, are the men, and yet they're sort of left out. Our goal is to try and pull a lot of these men together. I'm meeting more of them all the time, and to try and make a difference around Indian men's health, to be role models for young boys, to change the norms around what's acceptable behavior, to reconnect with Indian traditions that, you know, have pride in their heritage, but also recognize that in today's world you have to learn how to live in this reality as well. And there's people who are models for blending those, and Levi's one of them.
Sometimes what happens in modern society with Indian women, and a lot of times they are conditioned to believe, well, it's just the Indian, he's just being an Indian guy. It's an Indian guy thing. And maybe they're not doing what they should be doing as far as working, going to work. Maybe they've actually gotten into the alcohol, got back on the bottle, and I think that maybe we need to get past that and say it's not okay to do that.
I think it's really kind of reframing what it is to be a warrior in today's society. And many of the same values of, you know, dedication, selflessness, putting your family above you. We need to learn a lot more about that. So I think research and getting pilot projects that bring in traditional healing techniques.
That's why I think American Indian males really have to become strong advocates for one another and become strong role models for each other.
Without our culture, without those ancient or those traditional teachings, without that language, we're going to lose ourselves. We're going to lose our identity.
I, as a young woman, left and traveled the world and was gone out of our community for about 20 years. When I came back, it was almost like I was slapped in the face because all those elders that did keep the language were gone. I no longer could hear the language here, and a lot of our cultural knowledge was gone.
Language really is the connection to culture that unites people.
Our language keeps those deep meanings of who we are. It protects them, and then in order for our children to understand who they are, they need to understand those deeper concepts in our language. I'll give you an example of one. In English, you would say baby. In our language, you would say banuji. But be is something coming towards you. Nuji is a small spirit. So the Anishinaabe people believe that we are spiritual beings having a physical life. And the more I learned of the language, I mean, it's so breathtakingly beautiful. And like I said, those deep meanings that are in there, we can't really understand who we are without it.
We've been trying to assimilate our young kids into a language education. It's immersion, total immersion classes they have, they go to all day. So that's interesting watching them little ones talking away in our native tongue. Really good too.
Magizi. What does Magizi mean?
Eagle.
Eagle.
I can tell you that from my own experience, just, singing around that drum. Everything that I needed to know to live a good way of life, I could take all those teachings from around the drum and apply it. So I made a decision, early in my life, I wasn't going to drink, wasn't going to smoke, I wasn't going to do drugs. Where did those values come from? Came right from our culture. Came right from the teachings, came from that drum, came from those ceremonies. My children, raised them with them same values in the home. Brought up around that drum. Since my oldest was just in diapers. A lot of times we were singing around that drum, he'd just fall right asleep. But we're taught that before they come out into this world, they're listening to another heartbeat, and that of their mother. And so when they're on that drum, there's that heartbeat. And that's what we consider that Dewagan. Ode, that de means heart in our language. That drum is the heartbeat of our community.
Get a little bit of the bell, you get a little bit of the snare. A drum is a living thing. And, it's part of life, let's put it that way. And there's a spirit to the drum. And you have to treat it in a certain way if you want to get the best out of it. We're on now the trail of Hiawatha, or as Longfellow in his poem would tell you, Hiawatha, and the Nuck band of the Ojibwa had residence on Lake Michigan and on Lake Superior, and this trail connected the two. And on the shores of Gitchigumi by the bright sea, shining water, that's what they're talking about, the bright sea of Lake Michigan, the bright sea of Lake Superior. And these are the woods. And at one time, these woods, before they were logged, the average tree was like being in the sequoias in the redwood. Michigan actually means it's Mishi, which is great. Michiamikanang, it was great trees from sea to sea. They saw life as an organic whole, that I'm part of, not just part of a tribe, I'm part of a whole ecostructure of physical, spiritual, mental, that we're in this all together. Sometimes when you get to a transition, you got to go back, and you've got to call in the ancestors. You've got to call in everything that you can, and when you can't find it inside yourself, sometimes you just have to cleanse and let nature help you. So 10 years ago, when I was going through a very difficult time, I needed to have a transition. I needed to figure out where I was going. I decided to go back in history and retrace this migration from Lake Superior to Lake Michigan and back. And I walked along this trail, and amazing things happened. In the dead of winter, I had a butterfly, a Compton's tortoiseshell butterfly, come and fly with me for miles. Just was always right here, right at my side. You know, I sang the whole way. Na hey 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 no way na way na hey 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 no way Manitou Maingen. Oh hey hey no way Manitou na hey hey no way Manitou. That's, and you know, they'd call in whatever spirit was on the would come to me. And when I finally got there to the Wabeno, and I just had shown up. No one knew that I was going. When I got there, there were 30 people in the Wabeno in this sort of hemispherical structure with where the sacred fire is, praying for me.
And the Wabeno was, I don't like to refer to it as a church, but it was a place where all business was handled. Birth, our burials, our disagreements were all handled within the sacred fire. When my parents grew up, it was not good to be Native. So they cut off my Native heritage right off. It was zero. My grandmother used to do food offerings and make these things, and then we quit because it was better to fit in. But in that process, then, there was something missing, spirituality in my children. So that's when Nowatan stepped in. When I needed him, he was just here. And he just said, here's how we live the old way. So that was the sacred fire.
He became his teacher. He taught him everything about the sacred fire and about how it had been around all this time, and how the sacred fire is actually in you, but it's there, and how to access all that.
Nowatan was a big part of why we started following this way. He was a great spiritual leader. You know, he always said, you know, if you were the only one at that fire, you know, don't ever let it go out. You know, keep that fire burning. So that was good, because there were some times that it became very, very difficult for us. We accepted everybody, and some people felt that this was strictly for Native people only.
I don't think that the Native American experience is exclusive for Native Americans. I think it's a human experience that's available to anybody.
And they say this is Native American spirituality. Spirituality is spirituality. It's every one of us. We're trying to say we own it. We own nothing.
This way of life that we have chosen to follow is a natural way of life to us. This is something that was presented and people shared all around the world at one time.
You get to understand that there's a greater meaning of what's going on, that the fire represents the center of the planet, and the physical space of the Wabeno is our earth and underneath. And it's just a very, very spiritual place.
When I came to this fire, all I wanted to do was be a better person. And I thought if I could be a better person, I could be a better father. That's all I wanted. That's all I asked of this fire. And those things kind of happened to me because it cleansed. For the first couple years I came here, all I did was cry. Because when you get close to that, it'll pull all of that stuff out of you. And that's what you're asking for, is that peace within.
When you light the Wabeno, all you simply do is create a place of safety. And you're lighting this, it brings the energy of love. This is tobacco. I was offered this tobacco to light this, so I tend to put the circle around the fire so that everything comes as pure and good. What them are, are the 4 main plants we use. The east is tobacco. The north, the white, is a sweetgrass. In the west is sage. And this is cedar, is the south. It's the 4 main race of people. So that's why I use these 4 are mixed. It's all 4. This is from the peat moss of Ireland. This is stuff that I've accumulated traveling with the fire keepers of the world. As you sit here, these little things just come to you to put in. That's from the fire keepers of Peru. This is some of the stuff they use in their fires in Peru. This is for the film crew. This was brought for their journey. Iskatagan comes off the thunder tree, the white birch. It's a fungus, so you ask its permission to help us. It's a good piece. Dead in the north. 1 strike.
1 strike.
Man, that's a good firekeeper, isn't it?
Yeah, more nice when they lay like that.
Wow, look at that.
This one is lit from a black stone. We call them the blue stone. The flints, the white.
And then part of this is our intent and our thought. We call it a magic, but it's really just asking all of creation to come be with us. Our ancestors held this in secret for a long time. Most of the time we think of medicine as a prescription or an aspirin, where a lot of it is what we release, what we let go of. Some people hang on to their hurt, and that's why these things were given to us, so we could let that go and go live in a pure way.
So tonight we've asked Dwayne to host us into the Sweat Lodge and to let go any thoughts or feelings that no longer serve us, so that you can create the opportunity to receive gifts that are intended to come to you.
So what we're going to do here is ask permission from this fire to transfer it over to the Purifying Lodge. So I'll scoop some coals out. I'm going to ask permission to transfer this. And then we'll walk it over to the, look at that, it opened right up. Look at you.
Hey, how about that?
So I'm going to let you, we're going to walk it this way in a spiritual manner. This is that healing direction. We go around this way.
Do you want me to pause?
Whatever you feel you got to do. That's part of it. It's your turn. And this is what it's all about, letting people breathe, letting them be their true self. And you can dump them coals right down here.
Right here?
Yeah, on that wood right there. Okay. Now, so what we're doing here is we transferred the fire to get this one going so we can do that purifying lodge. So what we did here is we banked up the stones already. We're trying to get it going, I guess.
There you go.
And there's 7 teachings that come with that lodge, and that one word is respect, truth, humility, generosity. Love is the most important one. And that's what governed us as people. We would study those 7 teachings. So we're going to heat them stones up tonight. And then what we'll do is we're going to lay an umbilical cord down from the fire to the lodge out of cedar. Cedar is our tree of life. So it connects just like the womb with the umbilical cord. And then once we go in, that core will be glowing in the red when we bring them hot stones in.
You lead, we'll follow.
Yeah, well, it'll all start and happen when we get in there.
So that's how the sweat lodge we use with our veterans, with our women, with our sickness, pull it out and get rid of it. Because the stones absorb that.
And what is the sickness?
The biggest one that I deal with today is shame.
One of the things about doing these is you always tell a joke before you go in. Because there's laughter. And laughter is great medicine. Well, for the longest time, I didn't see things in there. And one night I had the young boys and we were going in and my son looked at me, he said, "Dad, you know what your problem is?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "You're too serious." I thought, "What do you mean?" The young guy telling me that I'm running the lodge. He says, "You got to lighten up." So all them young boys went in and one farted. Well, that had everybody laughing. And we were just rolling in there. And we started doing the songs and pretty soon, here come an eagle by. Pretty soon I seen a bear come in. I thought, how right was that? He's right, you got to be lighthearted. To me, life is this ceremony. It's 24/7. It's every breath I take.
It's important for us to tell our story. Years ago, there was a report done called the Red Report that basically said the mainstream media will come to us if we're fighting. They will report on us, the casinos, and maybe some powwows. But it's the core issues that are important to Indians, they just really leave alone. And I think many times it's the fact that they just may not even understand who we are as Indian people. Native News Network really tries to do more in-depth of letting people know, whether you're native or non-native, why we are thinking the way we think, why our positions are a certain way, and why we've taken positions. My thing is, how does it get down to the everyday Indian? Why does it matter? One of our best stories that at our level went viral for us, that I want to say over the course of a weekend about 1/3 people read, was when a young girl in Wisconsin was scolded and actually suspended from a basketball game for speaking her Menominee language. And that thing went crazy over the internet for us. And there again, I would say we had close to 700 comments, and people were just outraged that a teacher in 2012 would go up and slam her hand on the desk and say, "You cannot speak your language in here, because I don't know what you're saying. You could be talking about me." When in essence, she was saying, "I love you" in the Menominee language. It highlights the importance of Indian language, of what was being taken from us, and what was taken from us for centuries, and certainly in recent decades in some of the schools. And that's what the comments by our readers were, is that this happened to me 40 years ago by a nun in a Catholic school, or my teacher slapped my hands with a ruler because I spoke the Indian language. And I think what happened was it really opened up some wounds that were not fully healed.
Along the path to being the CEO of my own firm, I had a number of experiences that were terrific, all of them involving innovative, revolutionary technology, you know, as part of a team.
This is a slide that has come to kind of represent our company when we show customers that we are involved with invention and science and design. We wanted to include the resources of the earth and solar and water and energy, and it became kind of a more spiritual message of where ideas come from.
See, I know that the whole secret to invention, it doesn't come from you, it comes through you. And that's something Native Americans get. Every time I take on a project, I consciously hollow out my bones and ask the breath of the Creator to come through. And you can't do it and it doesn't come out like in paragraph form. It comes out with a hunch, an instinct, something like that. How do we solve things when there are no answers, when it's unprecedented? I mean, that takes an intuitive understanding, and that's an area Native Americans had down to a science. We don't teach any of that. You know, now we have testing in school, and everything is driven by testing. I think that's exactly wrong. What you want to say is, here is this miracle of a human being, and how are we going to tap what's into that person and make it valuable for the whole tribe? You know, where do ideas come from? You don't know where they come from. The idea is that you have to surrender and you have to turn off your mind. Every good idea that I've ever had I've been sort of a dog chewing its bone, and finally I just surrender it and walk away, and then when I least expect it, the solution just, boom, appears. It's sort of like that finger that you see there, that the hand of God comes down and just gives you that idea.
The powwow here today in Ann Arbor, well, it's been here for 40 years now. I started dancing here, and as a veteran, I started coming in as their head veteran, carrying in the Eagle staff and bringing our people into the circle.
We like to honor our veterans in every powwow. There are always veteran dances, and the veterans are come out. It really reminds me of a gentleman who I know in Grand Rapids who had come back from Vietnam. And years later, he attended a powwow. And as a veteran, he was invited in. And he's not native, but he's invited into the circle. And he said he got goosebumps. He started to cry. He said because he had never been honored in such a way.
This is just keeping the culture alive and keeping the culture strong. In a lot of ways, the tradition, it's about dancing for Creator, dancing for Mother Earth, keeping Mother Earth alive, and giving back the energy of our soul to the earth in a good way. Prayers are brought into the circle for people, specific people that might have a disability. Then there's elders that can't dance anymore because they have an injury or something, and so then, you know, oftentimes dancers will go up and ask an elder if they'd like that dancer to dance for them. It's a very sacred tradition.
Hey Bunky, this is the first time you've been to the University of Michigan, to the powwow?
It is the first time in the state of Michigan.
Okay.
It's really a good experience.
Well, welcome to the people of Three Fires, the land of the people of Three Fires. It's the Anishinaabe people, Potawatomi, Ojibwa, and Ottawa, 12 federally recognized tribes here in the state. Now, you really are a strong advocate working with youth issues. So what do you think about the native usage of the internet?
So I always try to encourage a really positive usage of that internet. You know, like when we're online, you know, when we're on Facebook and Twitter, or, you know, when we're texting, we're operating in our visual identity.
Okay.
And to me, that's one of our biggest assets as Native people, is the way we view ourselves and the way we want the world to view us. And by taking accountability as young people, and you know, using our native language, you know, changing our like Facebook names, you know, to traditional like Indian names.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Little things like that really starts to kind of encourage a public pride, I guess, of our people.
You do a lot of things for Nike.
Design consultant. So I've actually designed, like the shirt I have right here is the limited edition signature series that we came out with my shoes as well, that I've you know, designed, and it's based on my art.
When you are actively in the creativity stage of your design, are you thinking about images that are going to be portrayed in a very positive way?
Yeah, for sure. And it's like this design right here. It's basically I integrated it from a painting that I'd made called Triple Threat, and in basketball terminology, it's when you first get the ball, you can shoot it, you can dribble it, or you can pass it. So I wanted to use that kind of as a metaphor for us, that we're poised and we're ready and we have options. And it's
I like that.
Yeah, to make our choices and kind of be responsible for our own actions.
What are some of the major challenges that Indian people face today?
You know, like in my experience of, you know, going to all these communities and working with Native youth all over the country, there's a lot of similarities, and a lot of the negative indicators, you know, social indicators, like these categories, you know, like Natives are at the top, you know, like we have the highest teen suicide rates, the highest teen pregnancy rates, the highest dropout rates, even like really high numbers of our men in incarceration, sexual violence against our women. I mean, on all these categories, we're at the top of those lists, and a lot of it, to me, stems from you know, from that disconnect from our culture. We don't live by that moral code that our ancestors did, and we're causing a lot of these issues because we're not being responsible and being proactive in changing our communities.
There's this separation between Mount Pleasant and the reservation. It's like two totally separate places. Most people in Mount Pleasant, you find out that they've never even been on the reservation until the casino opened, and that's all they know. Thankfully, we have the Zeboing Center, the museum, that, you know, that helps school-age children, so they kind of get to go out there and understand, you know, the reservation at a young age, and hopefully, you know, preventing them from being so separate.
And for me as a tribal leader, there has to be some accountability in our own people to know that you can't just say that in-town is prejudiced against us. You have to acknowledge that in our hearts we probably have some resentment towards them for the way that we've been treated. So we need to find a way to let that go too, to have some healing.
We can be a unique culture, but we also need to arm ourselves with knowledge of all cultures. Because America is very diverse, and we need to really embrace our diversity. And the best way we can embrace it is learning more about one another.
There are differences between non-natives and natives, but overall, I really feel like I'm a strong believer that we're all human. And if I, you know, speak from the medicine wheel teaching, you know, that medicine wheel encompasses all races. It doesn't just encompass the native people. As far as the medicine wheel was concerned, we're all equal. It's a circle. Everybody's included in that circle. Nobody is treated any differently. I feel strongly that that medicine wheel teaching is something that a lot of people could live by and be guided by.
I have faced racial discrimination as an Indian person. However, I've always tried to rise above that and take the negative and turn it into a positive. That's the message I think we need to instill in our youth today. There's some real strength in realizing who we are as Indian people. Because Indian people are strong people, and we have survived so many attempts of genocide and wars and public policies that have fought us every step of the way. And if I think about the resilience and the strength as survivors, and that's the message that I think we need to instill in the young people who are Indians, of being proud to be Indian.
Come to the circle.